Hello and welcome to the CPA Australia podcast, your weekly source for accounting, education, career and leadership discussion.
The June 2021 article is all about creating dependent drop-downs. I've also heard it called cascading drop-downs, which probably sounds better, but dependent drop-downs are when one drop-down that you select from will determine the entries in the next drop-down that you select. So in our little example here, we've got a table with products, we've got gadgets and widgets, we've got sizes like small, medium, large, and then we've got colors. Now, based on the product, when you select a product, the next drop down is going to have only those sizes that relate to that product. And then we get to the color. The color is only going to be displayed based on the product and the size that you have chosen. So for the widgets, for example, they have an extra large size, whereas the gadgets don't. And so this is going to be dependent. So each drop down is dependent on the previous one. Now, the first drop down is actually really easy to create in terms of creating the list that goes into the drop down. Now, we'll be using the latest version of Excel for this, and which is the subscription version. So some of these techniques are only available in the subscription version. It's now called Microsoft 365. It used to be called Office 365. And it has dynamic arrays as well as the XLOOKUP function, which we will build as well. Now, in terms of dynamic arrays, there is a function that works really well with creating lists for drop-downs. It's the unique function. So unique will extract out of a table all of the unique entries, and basically it removes duplicates. So in column A of the table, we've got a whole lot of gadgets and widgets. Well, what the unique is going to do is just going to produce a list that says gadget, widget. That's it. So it's only going to be 2 entries there. And we can use that as the list for the drop down. Now, a couple of shortcuts to open up the data validation dialog in Excel. You can use either, and these are pressed in sequence, Alt-A-V-V. So the V is repeated to there. And the other one, and now this one relates actually to previous versions of Excel, which are still valid. The shortcut is Alt-D-L. And again, you press these in sequence. You don't hold anything down. And that will open up the data validation dialog. And you select List from the Allow drop-down. And then you click in the source box. You click on the cell that has the list. In our case, it's K2. And then you press the hash key. So the hash key is above the number 3 on the keyboard. And that is how you refer to what's called a spill range. Because what the unique function does is it spills down. So it starts in K2 and it goes to K3, but the formula is only in K2. It's a spill range, which I have covered in previous articles and podcasts. So basically, to refer to that spill range, which automatically expands as entries are made to it, you just use the hash symbol after the reference to the top left cell in that range. And that will refer, even if it's a 2-dimensional range. The ones we'll be working with today are all just single column ranges. And that's it. And then click OK, and that will put the drop down into the cell that you're working with. Something else I should mention, we are working with a formatted table here. Formatted tables and these functions work very well together. Formatted tables automatically expand, so they're dynamic as well. And these functions that we're using are also dynamic. So if you add another product, which I do if you watch the video version of this, I add a toy to the end of the product list, and that automatically is updated in the drop down. So formatted tables and dynamic arrays and these new dynamic array functions all work seamlessly together. Okay, so we've created a drop down for product. Now we need the size. So what we have to use here is the filter function. So filter can filter a column of data based on an entry in another column. So we'll be filtering the size column based on the product selected in the first drop down. As I mentioned, some of the sizes are only available in one of the products. Now, the filter function does most of the work for us. So what you do with the filter function is you specify first the column you want to filter, then you specify the condition. So in our case, the product must equal whatever we've selected in our drop-down. And then you can put a entry for something that will display if it's not found, basically. So for example, if we haven't made a selection yet in the product drop-down, we can just display the word none. You have to enclose it in quotation mark. Okay, the filter, just the raw filter, is going to filter all of the sizes. So as you'll see if you watch the video, there's 3 smalls, 3 mediums and a large for the gadget option. Now that's not what you can display in a drop-down. In a drop-down, all of the entries should be unique. And that sort of gives it away. All we need to do is wrap the unique function around the filter function. And that will give us small, medium and large when we select gadget. And then again, we do the same with the drop down. We link to the cell. We've got helper cells on the right hand side. That's where we're creating these lists. So basically you refer to the very first cell, put the hash on the end, and that's how you can create the drop down. For the color option, we need 2 separate conditions. So what we can do there is we can actually copy the formula from the size drop-down list that we created and paste that into the color drop-down list that we're going to create, and we just add another condition. Now to do that, we put brackets around the existing condition and use the multiply symbol, so the asterisk, and then we put brackets around another condition, and that condition relates to size. So when the product column equals our first drop down and the size equals our second drop down. That's 2 conditions. When you're working with 2 conditions, you can either have 4 basic results. So it can be true, true, false, false, true, false, and false, true. Now in Excel, true equals 1 and false equals 0. Now when you put that multiplication sign between them, what happens is, let's say true is multiplied by true. So 1 is multiplied by 1 and that returns a 1. And that is treated as true by the filter. And so that will show any entries that match both conditions. In Excel, false equals 0. So if any condition is 0, when you multiply it, it zeros it. So 0 is treated as false. And so if either of the conditions is false, then that row won't display. So you're only going to get when it matches both conditions. And that's it. And that creates the list for the final drop down. Having done that, we can then create the extraction of the price, because we've got a column for price there. So based on 3 separate conditions, we're going to extract the price. Now you could use a sum if s for that, but I've used an XLOOKUP and performing a little bit of magic with it. What I've done is I've combined the 3 separate entries. Now they're in F2, G2 and H2, and what I've done is I've put the ampersand symbol between them. So F2 ampersand G2 ampersand H2. And what that does is that gives you like a single code combining all 3 entries together. And then you put the comma. So that's the first thing, that's the first part of the XLOOKUP. The second part of the XLOOKUP is where you want to look for that particular code. Now I can do exactly the same thing with the columns in the formatted table. So you refer to the column, put the ampersand, then refer to the next column, the ampersand, and the last column. And that creates like a single column of all of the entries combined, like joined if you like. And so the product size and color is looked up, and then you tell it, so another comma, then you tell it what you want to extract, which is just the price column. And then the very last argument we're going to use is the default entry if it can't find something, and so that's just comma 0. So if any one of the entries is missing, it's just going to display as 0 there. So that's the XLOOKUP. And again, you can watch the companion video to see how that all ties together. Also on the video, I show how if you add an extra product, that automatically populates in the drop down. The same with the size and colors. And it's all automatic when you're using dynamic arrays and formatted tables. So remember, formatted tables automatically expand to include extra rows added to it. So again, I did an article on formatted tables and a podcast. If you're not using formatted tables, I highly recommend that you do, because there's so many advantages with using it. That dynamic nature just makes so many other things so much easier. And I did put one thing extra in the video. Was initially I used the word none to basically say there's nothing available, because maybe you haven't made a selection. You could change that to refer to the previous selection. So for example, in the size drop down list, you could, instead of having the word none, you could actually put the words select a product. And that will display as a drop-down entry, like a single drop-down entry, that tells the people that they need to select a product before they can select a size. And similarly, you could do that with the color drop-down list. Instead of having the word none, you could put select a size there. Now, again, whenever you're referring to text, you have to make sure they're surrounded by quotation marks. Something else that did come out in the video is the use of the what are called structured references. So these are names that relate to the formatted table. So there is a table name, followed by a square bracket, followed by the column name, and then a closing square bracket. So that's a structured reference for how you refer to a column within a table. And again, when you use that structured reference, it automatically expands, which is what's been used in all of the examples in this article. Okay, I hope you've found that useful. And again, you can check out the video on the INTHEBLACK website to see everything happening. But really powerful features using formatted tables with dynamic arrays and also the dynamic array functions. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the CPA Australia podcast. For more information on today's episode, please visit the show notes at www.cpaaustralia.com.au/podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Stitcher.